Right? Are you? I can still speak. I will be speaking. It's like Dudley's Edge. Want to go to Russia? Yes.
Order at 6:07. We're going to pause for a moment of silence. And Mr. Sandoval, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much for your patience, as I mentioned. And this evening, Ms. Pengarelli had prior engagement 2 weeks ago, so she did say she'd be watching from online at a later time. So with that being said, we have all governing board members here. We're going to start off with staff recognitions, and I believe at this time there are none, but I do want to acknowledge Mr. Savoy. It's his birthday today, so thank you for spending your evening with us. And then proceed with 3.2, board recognitions. I do want to take this moment and acknowledge the last board morning to my governing board members and the community to address the behavior that evolved. Undoubtedly, we're in a situation that there's a lot of emotion, and I recognize that I am not immune to that emotion. But I believe my colleagues and my governing board members are all here for the right reasons to support our students, our educators, and our community. And so with that, I do apologize, and I appreciate all your time and service to our governing board and our community. And with that being said, are there any board recognitions, Mr. Sandoval?
Yes, so I think the three of us attended, right? The volunteer recognition event that took place, but I think that's one that's top of mind, and I'll speak to that. But again, you know, my recognition, yeah, it continues to be what I will call Peoria's finest. You know, which are our 4,000 plus associates that we have within Peoria Unified School District. You know, from the teachers to the admin to the staff. You know, all channels are invaluable to the success of our students, the district, a city, and our state. So thank you for your dedication to that. Now, with regard to the volunteer event, you know, yet another group that you know spends countless hours, you know, to assist you know individuals across the entire district. And there again, with the overall focus being on our students. So, you know, for me, that would be a career goal of mine. You know, when I retire, I think that's a great gig that I might take on to volunteer and help you know those who continue to serve and inspire our students on a daily basis. So thank you again for that.
Ms. Doan? Ms. Connect?
Just a couple things. I tried to see as many Red for Ed things this week. It was very exciting and very inspirational. And I really strongly believe that our teachers and our educators have the support of the community. And that's just by my unofficial poll of the amount of horn honks that came by. So that was very exciting. Two other things I wanted to mention. I was invited by Mrs. Rodriguez at Apache Elementary to see her ROD Talks, which is the 5th grade version of a TED Talk. And the students get to choose their own topic, something that inspires them. And they practice synthesizing information that they research and speaking to strangers in public. And it was amazing. And I used to teach 5th grade, and I never did anything that cool. So so congratulations to Mrs. Rodriguez and her students there. And then last night, I had the opportunity to be welcomed by the Cactus High School National Honor Society and see their new inductees into that program, which emphasizes great service and academic achievement. So that was an honor, and it's great to be there. Congratulations to all of them.
Thank you for that, and I would echo that sentiment about Apache Elementary. I know one student, 5th grade, said the art of the voice, and she did a phenomenal job. So, With that being said, we're moving on to the next agenda item, which is consent agenda item 4.1, approval of a consent agenda item. Are there any items that need to be pulled?
I think I'd like to pull 4.2 since I was not here for one of those meetings and have that approved without my vote because I was not here.
Any other items be pulled from the agenda?
Madam President, I move to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item 4.2.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for the consent agenda item excluding 4.2. Motion passes 4-0 and 1 absentee.
Madam President,
Ms. Connect?
given that Mrs. Doan was not present, I move to approve item 4.2, the approval of the minutes from April 12th, 14th, and 17th.
I second that. The motion reads to approve item 4.2 by Ms. Connect, seconded by myself. Motion passes 3-0 and 1 abstain. Moving to the next agenda item. Would any of our governing board members like to reorder or address the agenda items listed below?
President, I suggest that we move public comment up in the agenda. In my recollection, it usually is, just in the event that people do want to speak, that they don't have to sit through some other reports that they may not be interested in.
I acknowledge that the only thing is the 3 public comments are to address 6.3, the budget item. Do we have any more other green slips?
No.
So there's not necessary to move the item?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it sounds to me that the agenda items could stand as is? Perfect. Moving forward, 6.1, discussion and consideration of approval of coaching and extra duty assignment, hourly and special assignment pay schedules and salary placement schedules. Dr. Carter Davidson.
Good evening, President Sam Martinez, members of the board, and Superintendent Pallas Thompson. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come to you tonight. Tonight is pretty much an opportunity to discuss a typical agenda item as it relates to those things that we mentioned, the coaching and extra duty assignment pay schedule, the hourly and special assignment pay schedule, and the salary placement schedules for the following school year. Knowing that Mr. Hicks and his budget committee will be presenting in the near future, I'd like to say that these things could potentially change, but what I do know, since 2014-15, we have not added any changes to the salary placement schedules. As you know, that was when our board at the time and our staff chose to get rid of the step and level system in the district for placement on the salary schedule. And so we utilize the things that I gave to you tonight to help place all sorts of different employee types as they come into our district. The only other item that has changed in terms of the dollar figure itself is the classified hourly schedule. As you know, with Proposition 206, I bring that to you every January, actually in December, to implement in January that 50-cent change as we move up to that $12 minimum wage. So those are the items tonight that I bring to you. I did also provide you some items that were highlighted in yellow simply to ensure that we are aligned in practice and that what we say is what we do. So, for example, if you recall earlier this year when we talked about travel stipends, I said to you that I'd be doing an in-depth study of supplemental pay. And so over the last 2 years, I've had a chance to dig in and look at the variety of supplemental pays that we give our employees. So when you look at the extra duty assignment pay scales, you will see some of those things that are highlighted that are things we do. I just want to ensure that you see them and that you know that they're there. And some of those things, for example, would be a coordinator stipend and some of those other things, curriculum stipends, et cetera. So tonight I stand here for any questions, but certainly I would ask you for your recommendation and for your approval of those items that are here before you tonight.
Mrs. Connect.
So what you're saying is that depending on the budget that is approved by the legislature eventually, we could have the opportunity to adjust this.
Mrs. Connect, I would certainly take advice and recommendations from you as a governing board, as do I believe our budget committee would. Certainly if that were to come to fruition, I'd love to be able to bring you back revised salary placement schedules if the resources allowed that. Certainly, yes, ma'am.
So my fellow board members, this kind of begs the question, if we have quite a few salary-related issues on the agenda tonight, and there's so much unknown right now, I'm just wondering if these conversations are premature. I mean, I would hate to debate them and come to a conclusion and then have the entire financial landscape shift under our feet and have to start over again.
What is the consequence, Dr. Davidson, of not taking care of this tonight?
I would say, Ms. Doan, very limited consequence, to be honest with you. The fact of the matter is, when we are hiring new candidates to work with us now, we're using the same information that we used last year. The piece on the supplemental pay, there might be some people impacted as we move into summer. That was one of the things we hadn't reported before was summer pay for summer school and things like that. But again, that was a practice that's already in place. It's just simply I wanted to bring it to you tonight. So again, to answer your question,
the
it
reason,
wouldn't hinder us.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. The reason I ask my fellow board members is we know that the issue that's top of everyone's mind right now is teacher compensation, primarily educators, and it is teachers and educators that fill these positions. I mean, so this is other work that we're asking our employees to do, and we haven't raised these fees for some period of time.
Yes, ma'am.
So again, I think that knowing what resources we have to deal with first may be a more prudent way to move forward.
Mr. Sandoval.
Thank you. So, Dr. Davidson, the existing recommendations are based on known budgets. Is that correct? And you know, dependent upon what comes down at the state level, could increase the numbers but not decrease.
Certainly, I wouldn't anticipate a decrease, Mr. Sandoval. My understanding is the Budget Committee typically has this conversation, and that the recommendation you'll hear later is that there wasn't any intent to put additional resources into new hires. So that's why I felt comfortable bringing this to you tonight, that the intent of the Budget Committee was to keep the resources with our current staff. So there would be no changes. That's, again, why I was here tonight.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, in Ms. Connect, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, there's more information to come, without question. And I'm always hesitant to, approve something that is somewhat not fully informed, at this point. However, that said, I mean, I don't know if there's, I don't even know if, there's some contingency or some, official notification that we can receive as a board, once we receive more information, how these budgets finalize based on, what's still to come, right? And still vote on that. Does that make sense?
I'm not exactly sure. What I'm thinking is, because I'm looking at all these things, and
yeah,
there's some things that we brought to the conversation before, and forgive me, I think I'm kind of jumping a lot of the number sixes together because there's a lot of salary things in there.
Right.
I love the new budget process in that we have multiple times meeting with different stakeholders, giving input and getting feedback and watching that evolve. The problem still remains that we don't see it till it's tied up in a bow.
Right.
And I'm just knowing that there's plenty of things in my head that I will have questions about and suggestions about, and I'm just guessing that the three people to my left have them too. And so there is a level of frustration is too hard a word, but that we're not given the opportunity to say, yeah, well, we're talking about school psychologists, but one board member a few weeks ago said, what about social workers? And it's not in here. So how do we get our ideas and our priorities illustrated in a proposed budget, and not just be in a position to say yay or nay?
I would recognize those comments as well. As in their January study session, I believe the sentiment from the governing board was to close some gaps. There's still a lot of unknowns. And with that being said, I also understand a lot of teachers sign their contracts because they don't know what they're agreeing to or what they're signing to. So I can recognize that by making a vote tonight, we would be answering those questions for them, what is moving forward. But the reality is the state hasn't come down. Now, Mr. Hicks, I do have one question. The Budget Committee has been meeting for 6 months. All these items that are being presented to us, was there any discussion from the Budget Committee to alter any of these buckets?
Madam President, members of the board, yes, we talk about all of this every time. We talk about everything is on the table. And do we talk about it every year? We do. We do talk about what's our priority. So we talk about what's our #1 objective of the budget team during the year. And so, yes, all of that is included.
So these items that are being presented to us, is it safe to say that they could change based on what is going on in the state and what the Budget Committee comes back together and say they want to change things?
Madam President, members of the board, nothing that's on his rose to the level of a priority for the budget team to change. So it was considered, let's keep it as is, because we would like to give as much money to the people that are working here now in those positions and not work on extra duties and other things right now. The focus was primarily on the positions.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my question, Dr. Davidson, if this is actually pretty much set in stone as far as it's not planning to change any of this.
Ms. Stone, certainly from my perspective, that's why I brought it to you tonight. Again, you just heard Mr. Hicks' perspective in the budget committees. However, again, if our legislature says, hey, we want to do things a lot differently in Peoria, you have an opportunity to expand these. I would love to bring that back, as I stated. Madam President, if our board isn't comfortable, another avenue for us is to hold, and perhaps at a future meeting I could put these in the consent agenda if there was no changes, making it that, a very simplified process for you, if that's the route our board chooses to take as well, giving you another option.
What are you proposing?
Ms. Connect.
What are you proposing?
Connect, I was just saying if there weren't any additional changes and the board didn't feel comfortable moving tonight, I simply could put these in the consent agenda and in a different meeting, therefore giving you still the opportunity to vote even without having to have another agenda item.
I'm certainly not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to see if we can do better. That's
Understand? Yes, ma'am.
So then, at this time, it is an action item. Do I have a motion to table it?
What's your recommendation, Mrs. Thompson?
Thank you, Mrs. Connect. There is, I don't believe, anything here that is going to be in granite and not something that we can be comfortable adopting tonight. I know that Mr. Hicks and his committee has worked to embed a lot of these pieces in there. Some that I'm concerned a little bit about are the initial salary placements for certain things, such as our guidance counselors when we're starting, as we're offering positions, beginning psychologist positions. So I don't think this is a huge item that we can't go back to, as Dr. Davidson said, and say, let's readjust. I'd be comfortable with you going through and adopting this, but at the same time, we could wait 2 weeks. It's the pleasure of the board right now.
Would there be time, I hate to even say this out loud, for us to sit down with Mr. Hicks and Dr. Davidson and, see this all out on the table?
That was going to be my thought process. I know Mr. Hicks is going to go over a thorough a plethora of options of what the Budget Committee has been working on, and it was a potential voting item, but my thought was the same thing, is with all those options and seeing what comes down from the state as a finalized, that we as a board have a study session to make sure we know exactly what we're looking at and what we're voting on. Ms. Connect. Yep.
So to your question, Mrs. Sayas Martinez, Mrs. Connect, let me advise then that we do put this on hold for right now and return back to it either after, a possible session, that we can sit down and talk about it, or even after Mr. Hicks presents his pieces tonight, that you can say, oh, well, I can see where that fits.
And thank you for that, because, this agenda item, while it's delineated by itself, it's really in the context of an entire budget conversation.
That would be correct.
And so it's difficult to say, how did these positions fit into the bigger picture, which we haven't had a conversation about yet.
So I'm not sure if it's proper protocol to table it for another meeting, if that's your choice, or to move it after Mr. Hicks' agenda item.
Well, we can bring it
back up, right?
This meeting if we choose to, but Madam President, I will move to table this item.
Second.
I have a motion from Ms. Connect and a second from Mr. Sandoval to table item 6.1, discussion consideration of approval of coaching and extra duty assignment hourly and special assignment pay schedules and salary placement schedules.
That was for to table, right?
Yes.
No. Oh, table, okay, good.
Table the agenda item.
What? Oh, table the agenda item, yeah.
Motion passes 4-0 and 1 absentee. Thank you very much, Dr. Davidson.
Madam President, I
Mr.
apologize. Dr. Davidson, I just wanted to say, thank you. I don't want you to think at all that we're discounting the work that's gone into this. But I agree. I mean, there are so many moving parts going on right now with regards to, certain areas here that could be impacted. And the more informed we are, I think the more confident we are in making sure that we're, certainly applying world-class, thought and benefits to all. Thank you.
Moving on to 6.2, consideration of course fees, extracurricular activity fees, parking fees for 2018-2019. Ms. Michelle Myers.
Hello, good evening, President Ceja Martinez, members of the Governing Board, Mrs. Pallas Thompson. Thank you very much for the opportunity to provide information this evening and recommendations related to the published fee schedules for the 2018-19 school year. Attached to this agenda are fee schedules related to course fees, extracurricular and program fees, food service fees, and facility rental fees. As part of this presentation, I will share with you the background and requirements related to fees in the district, as well as to highlight some of those fees for next year, including some changes related to high school course fees. District Policy JQE allows the district to charge fees for extracurricular activities, community education programs, as well as course fees for specific classes. Extracurricular activities are school-sponsored optional activities that may require an enrolled student to pay a fee in order to participate. Generally, any optional non-credit activity that supplements the educational program at a school is considered to be an extracurricular activity per Arizona Revised Statute 15-324-24. A fee is an amount paid directly to a public school for support of an extracurricular activity. A fee is no longer required for an activity to be tax credit eligible. However, a school can charge a fee, but if so, it must not be more than the actual cost of the extracurricular activity and must be adopted by the governing board at a public meeting. The governing board must also authorize the principal to waive all or part of the fee if it creates a hardship for the student. For the 2018-19 school year, field trip and summer activities passes for site-related summer programs will remain unchanged for the 2018-19 school year, and supplemental and community education program fees will continue to vary based on the program. An example of this is Kids Zone and Ed Camp at some of our schools. There is also no recommended change in the amount that will be charged for participation fees for athletics or marching band. The fees for tutoring, lockers, and yearbook will also remain unchanged for the 2018-19 school year. There are several high school course fee changes that are being recommended for next year. The changes are the result of courses being new or requiring a fee increase due to inflation or an increase in supply costs. Instructional areas at the high schools that have a proposed fee change include animal science, visual arts, design classes, and theater showcase. There are also new courses in chemistry, biology, physics, and earth space science that will require a new fee for consumable materials. In the area of food service and facility rentals, there are no recommended increases from the current year to the 2018-19 school year. Lunch and breakfast prices will remain the same, $2.75 and $2.50 per meal for high schools and elementary schools respectively, and breakfast will remain at $1.75 at the high schools and $1.50 at our elementary schools. Administration recommends that the governing board approve the proposed fees, course fees, program fees, extracurricular activity fees, and other district fees for the 2018-19 school year as presented. And that concludes the presentation this evening. I'm available to answer your questions.
Mr. Sandoval.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you. So, quick question for you. I had the line item around allowing the principals to, make decisions on whether or not to waive fees due to a student's situation. By approving this, that gives them that authority. Is that correct?
Madam President, members of the board, yes, that is correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Ms. Stone?
I don't have any questions. Thank you very much.
Ms. Knight? At this time, I don't have any as well. I look forward to the new courses being offered, so that's exciting. So thank you so much, and I appreciate that. It looks like there are no more discussions. And do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the new schedule for course fees, extracurricular activity fees, including participation fees and parking fees for the 2018 to 2019 school year.
I second that. We have a motion from Ms. Stone to approve 6.2 consideration of course fees, extracurricular activity fees, and parking fees to 2018-2019 school year. Second by myself. Motion passes 4-0 and 1 not present. Thank you very much. Moving on to 6.3, budget update and consideration of approval for budget recommendations, including compensation for 2018-2019 school year. With this, Mr. Hicks will be presenting, and then we do have 3 public comments. And then following, we'll do governing board discussion.
Madam President, members of the board, Intern Superintendent Ms. Linda Pallas-Thompson, colleagues, community members, thank you very much. Again, it is always an honor to come up and present to the board, especially something that's been so long and difficult that we've gone on, and all the activity that's gone on in probably the last month has been a flurry. And I would say from a budget process, I've never had so many detailed, frank, and difficult conversations that we've held. I'd first start off with thank you very much, Madam President, as remembering that the biggest time that the board has input is during that governing board session that we do say, let's talk about budget priorities from the board. Ms. Sahar Martinez, you probably remember you had 5 items that we identified. We bring those back to the board committee so that they understand here is what the board identified as some of their priorities so that they're able to take that into consideration as they go for a recommendation. Obviously, whatever we do is just a recommendation and the governing board can do whatever they want. But that is a great opportunity to have input during the process at that time. So I'm going to go forward, go through the presentation. Please ask as many questions as we go through, since this was a very difficult process and a lot of probably concerns and everything. I encourage as many questions and participation as possible. First, let's just go through the process. We'll look at the recommendations and then also just some contingency language that we have in there. We did, normally we start the year around October, letting the board know here's our process, make sure that they're okay with that process. Normally we have 20 members. I think everybody's heard me say 20 members, but in review of, we did have a couple classified members drop right at the beginning due to other commitments. And not continuing in the district, so they didn't feel comfortable, and they were not replaced. So really, we had 18 active members this year, not the 20. We began in December. We did want to start a little bit earlier because we added benefits to the process. But if you remember last year, there was a lot of discussions about MOU, and we had to put on hold because that would have affected the budget process and the budget team. And so we waited for those conversations to end. We began in December. We did start with benefits, and so with that, we looked at claims, high claims, looking at a nice dive, getting into it, and going through. That was about 2 meetings and was a very good process. And I think we have some changes recommended in a few slides to make a modification regarding the benefits process. We do try to bring a member of that budget team to the board meeting at least once a month. Normally, it's just a very general update. Hey, we talked about benefits. Hey, we reviewed the governor's plan, just to give an update and see if the governing board has any additional times that they'd like to have any input regarding anything that's going on, and stand for any questions at that time. We start as a budget team. We look at last year. What did we go through? What was the recommendation to the governing board that they approved the previous year? We look at our annual financial report so that we could see how do we have an impact. We look at we actually run a fund balance report so that our members can see every single fund and every single dollar amount and how much we ended the year with. And so we could look at those balances so they could see that. And there's no sacred cows. There's no pink elephants. I don't know if they mean the same thing, but I use them out. And people can ask about anything. Hey, let's get rid of assistant principals. Let's get rid of coaches. Let's get rid of whatever. We want to learn about it. It's normally a question. It's a safe place that allows anybody to question any position, anything, and see a little bit more about what does it actually cost? What impact does it have to the M&O budget? We do focus a lot of our attention just on the M&O budget. So this year we had a lot of questions about title funds as they were being cut. We do not really delve in the world of the title funds, even though when we give a raise, if we're saying a base pay raise of 3%, they have to follow the same lead that we're doing. But we really don't discuss those title funds because they're so restricted in nature. We let that director, that person in charge of that, manage those funds. I'd like to recognize them. I see that there's about 9 of those members that were here. Let me first very, very much apologize. I know Jan is very important, and she's listed up there twice. Take on my part. I feel Not a mistake that you're not important, but I left off Mr. Jeff Levitt. He's a certified teacher from Centennial High School, and I feel extremely horrible that he sat through every single meeting and did not get any recognition. So if anybody sees him, please tell him that he was recognized for all of his hard work. And so if the 9 would like to stand, I don't know if you want to or not, Jan, you obviously are already singled out. But thank you guys for all your hard work. This year, more than any year, hopefully there was a feel of safety in there, but we questioned so much about so many others and how, mainly because as the additional funds, and we're talking about the governors, did create some divisions of classes in that sense and having to look at those different allocations in that sense. So, but they did an amazing job, gave up a lot of time and paid attention and asked a lot of difficult questions, so I appreciate that. The first thing they did, though, they did make recommendations to the modification to the process, which obviously is the same as the previous year, which is please start earlier. October was the identification. One of the reasons is we spent 2 meetings just talking about benefits. They wanted more, and they wanted, I believe from what I heard is, we have a third-party actuarial that comes in and talks about how we set our benefits being self-funded. They wanted that person to come in and go a little bit more about the process and how that's set. And so that would take at least 1 or 2 more meetings. So I think in October, start time is very appropriate. So that is one modification to the process. So let's jump in and look at increase the actual budget recommendations. So first, one thing that our group heard me say many, many times, first, normally we only have inflation to talk about, and it's a very small amount. This year the inflation amount is actually bigger, but we actually have a budget that when we looked at has a growth in students. And so my team understands we're building this on kids that, with current year funding, it adds an extra layer of concern, and then we're building it with an increase of students, which I always get nervous about. And so I say almost every single meeting, remember, we're building this with a growth of students. And so that's something to take note.
Madam President, Mr. Hicks, could you explain for anybody watching why that's a big deal? Why the change to current year funding is a problem, or it could be a problem?
Madam President, members of the board, of course, those that know on the speaking circuit, I have been against current year funding for a very long time, since the time when they first started. Essentially, we used to have a floor. And so prior years, before the legislature changed the process, we used to have a floor that our budget could not go below, which was the prior year's 100th day set a funding level and a number of students that it would not go below. When they took that out and said we're just going to go to current year, it took the floor away, which means that we are funded next year based on the number of students without a floor, meaning we have no idea. Now we have an idea because we know we have a demographer, we get projections, we look at the existing, we have an enrollment application that we look in our system. So we have a good idea, but the actual number we do not know. So just to be clear, our ADM is probably going to go a little bit down. We have online enrollment. We have concurrent enrollment. There are multiple facets of how enrollments are calculated, and a lot of those we do not know until June 30th, which means we get a report in July, which means we will know our exact budget after the year has already ended. And so without that floor, it's very concerning to me, may raise a lot of concerns. A lot of people raise a lot of concerns. The legislature did modify it and only had the M&O budget on current year funding and moved a lot of other funds to prior year funding. So it does minimize a little bit, but it is still very risky in that sense, meaning that if students don't come to fruition, regardless of its growth, your budget will go down, where before you had 1 year to brace for it because you knew it would go down the following year.
And make adjustments to staffing.
Correct.
Right.
So
Okay,
thank you very much for allowing me to voice my concerns on current year funding again. The one thing that it does have a real world impact, I go around to employee chats, and there's a lot, especially at the beginning of the year, we move teachers around based on some class sizes, and that is mainly because of current year funding, meaning our funding could go down if it goes before, where before we had a floor and we knew we'd be okay. That was taken out from under us, and it does have an impact of our parents, our students, and our teachers as they get moved around in that sense. So I didn't mean to make light of, even though I don't like it very much. It's a very bad idea. So here's, just in summary, we're going to go through the recommendations, but this is the document that we use. We look at our revenues, the growth, the inflation, other fund revenues, and then summary of those expenses, and I'll go through those detailed line, and then the capital budget in that sense. And so you could see right at the top, hopefully you could see, I know it's very small and the audience probably can't see right now, but you can see right at the top, I put their ADM change 232, so that we know that part of this revenue is built in on a growth of 232 students for next year. Inflation, we have a 1.75. Obviously, that increases our override. There was a 1.06, so that was approved budget last year that put in 1.06 to teachers. It was already approved last year to go to 2.12, so that was embedded into this budget, not talking about any additional changes. It's already been approved. And then we'll go through the expenses. So one is we make the assumption that we're going to continue all staffing models. And so that goes for class size, that goes for front office, that goes for counselors, that goes for administration. So all of those are going to continue. Once again, I'd like to remind everybody that this budget is built on student growth of 232. It is important to know that. And then part of that using the inflation is let's provide a 1% base pay to all employee groups. Now that is the base pay. That does not include the stipends, the extra pay, the extra duty pay, the supplemental pay. It is really just saying their base pay that all staff make on their main position, we're going to take that and multiply it by 1%. And that is where that comes from. We're going to support all professional growth for all groups. And so by January 30th, they're required to submit their application of what they've taken, the classes they've taken, and that goes into effect starting July 1, and that is going to continue, that all the hours that the people have put in for is going to be funded. Talking about the Prop 206 for a second is we're not going to provide that 1% increase to those people that make 1090 or below. Because they're going to be moved up to $11 on January 1st. And so they'll be getting in excess of a 1% raise at that time. And so we're saying let's only those that are 1091 and above get the 1% because everybody else will be moved up to the $11 on January 1st in accordance with Prop 206 and the law. You can see the cost for complying with the law is about $543,000 is what we're estimating at that time. And the cost for complying with our Arizona State Retirement System increase is $409,000, and so those must be funded as well. Please, although I caught that acronym, if I don't say an acronym, please clarify because we have more people in, and I get very calm in using all my acronyms without delineating them. So part of it is, so there is a growth in students, which means we need more teachers. So this has an increase of 4 K-8 classroom teachers. It has an increase of 1.13 special area teachers. High school teachers increased by 3.3. The special ed is a little bit different, so we look at that programmatically. So we work with, Mr. Savoy works with the special ed department, and there is a reduction of 3.0 on the K-8 side. High school is reducing by 0.7. There is an increase in the district-wide certified by 1.0, and an increase in instructional aides by 4.0 from the special ed program. Also, as part of the process, is there was requests and for additional crossing guards, and so this has 3 additional crossing guards at 2 schools. It does also, one of the requests that the budget team was asked to look at was counselor and their work calendar. They were currently asked to work, I believe, 10 extra days, and that would only be comp time or leave time, and the request was, can we pay them for those times? And so this budget has paying counselors 7 days. That does not mean they get the 3 days for the leave. It is, the budget team said, let's start with paying them 7 days. We're going to schedule 7 days, work with the, Mr. Croto and his team to identify those, and or our lead counselor, and pay the people for the days they're actually working in that sense. Also was a request that our IT staff, we've added lots and lots of student devices. We've added lots and lots of software programs. We've added lots of applications that people are using, and the IT department hasn't increased at all. In fact, I think it might have gone down from the programming side of it, and so their request for the cyber threats that we continue to have, the network, managing our network and stuff. And he gave, thank you, John, for that 7-page dissertation on why we need those 3 positions. I think you had us on the first page, but I appreciate the detailed request that you put in there. But we look at all that, and that entire request was provided to the whole team for them to read and understand why that request was in this budget, is recommending to please add those 3 positions. We also have an increase in the public relations department, add a clerk in that staff. Two main things have happened over the last year. One, in consent, you just approved a policy to change with a website accessibility, but with an OCR complaint about our website, and for the visually impaired, we have to fix that and manage it. And at the same time, we've also had more public records requests than ever, and those are required that we have to do those by law, and so this is funding a position in her department to manage those two processes. The other request we had, an additional request we had, was increase the district office to include a lead nurse. And so we do not have a standalone lead nurse. It's just somebody at a school that picks up a lot, and they're getting pulled left and right in so many different directions, so many certification requirements, and so many requirements to manage the LPNs and others, that request came, and that was also included in this budget recommendation. Now here, there are some M&O positions, so even though it's not the M&O budget, they're being included in this, and so just going to pass them on, which is, so this is an easy support when it doesn't hit the M&O budget. Our budget team is like, okay, it doesn't cost us anything, but it still gets kind of verified or validated by us, which is to increase the CTE by 1 for a lead counselor. And so it's not funded out of M&O, but it would be adding a lead counselor. Reclassification of CTE office staff, and so this has obviously also non-M&O, but this has changing to a grade 13. I'm sorry I didn't put the details. I'm looking. There's actually 3 going up and 1 going down, so it puts them all at a grade 13. It's just a grade level of classification of a position, so it's a salary allocation step where it is. And so this is moving 3 from a 12 to a 13, and 1 from a 15 down to a 13.
And I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Davidson, in their previous item, there was the grade chart. Is that what you're referring to? Okay.
Sorry, thank you. In addition, the transportation special ed router right now does not work on a year-round calendar, and we do have special ed that, students that are year-round and going to the extended school year, the ESY program, and so this has that calendar moving up from 10 to 12.
Excuse me, this is, Madam President, you're getting to the part where I had my questions. Do you mind if I just ask them as they go on?
Please jump on in.
Okay, so what's the rationale for moving from 10 to 12 months?
The students, we have students that are ESY, year-round, extended school year. Right now, the router leaves while they're still going, hopefully to program out all the routing and make sure everything happens. This would keep the whole team intact and allow that person to manage that process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. An additional reclassification of 4 admin assistants here at the DAC. 3 of them are non-M&O. Only 1 of them is a M&O position. And this is, I believe, moving 12 to from a 12 to a 13 or 11 to 12. I just have it up 1 position, 1 grade. And so it's up 1 grade. So even though these do sound small, they are small in dollar amounts. We still run them through the budget process to look at them. So that is literally a $700 request, but we still bring, even though we have a $215 million budget, and it sounds, why do we bring them? For transparency, we still have a process when we're looking at reclassifications. It does go through the budget team after it comes from HR. Part of it is also we build in contingent positions. So there are 12 certified contingent positions, meaning that starting in May, again in June, again in July, and then in August, Mr. Savoy with the team will then look at all the different schools, look at all the different enrollments, where they're at, where all the class sizes are, versus those class size staffing allocations, and seeing where they are. The difficulty is we hear from principals all the time, I'm gonna get 2 more, trust me, but with the current year funding, it's sometimes I'm on the other side saying, whites of their eyes, they trust me, and so they have to make tough decisions. They use these 12 contingent positions, so that covers it. It is also, if students aren't there and we don't have 232, this is where we cut, because nobody's hired yet using these. There's just contingent, like a contingency budget to cover that if that does not materialize. Next, as you remember, the governing board talked about eliminating the 3-site requirement for in-district travel. And so this budget obviously has that starting July 1, will require travel handbook revision, but it is included to make that change. This also has increases. So one, One thing that we also talked about, so we talk about everything in the budget team. One was, hey, what about if somebody gets hired in April, do they get the raise? What if somebody was hired in October and not there? And so this was, currently it's requiring that in all groups, so all different groups, that the person has to be in that position 50% or more than 50% of the work calendar. We talked about should we move it, and we were all over, and we had no consensus, and we could not get approval, so it's staying at you have to be there for at least 50% of that work calendar, more than 50% of that work calendar, to receive the increases that we're talking about right now.
Mr. Hicks, do you mind explaining the rationale and why we wouldn't prorate it? Is it because it's more time, cost? Why would we would not do that?
Prorate the raise?
Yes.
The increase in that sense. I do not remember that actually coming up as an, we literally talked about the day when it was if it tripped. And since we couldn't, this is what is in policy. And so the policy does not say to prorate it, it says to receive the increase, you have to bend there for 51%. So this, even though we tried to change it, and that is a great alternative that was not considered, ultimately nothing's changing, it's going to fall back into policy.
So if the board would like to carry this conversation further, we would need to discuss the policy first before we move forward with that recommendation.
Madam President, members of the board, yes, you could make the change and we would bring back policy changes after that. It could happen either way, but a policy change would be needed if it's changing that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. The other is a little bit talk about, I think I heard from a couple classified positions that did not receive, or an administration that did not receive any base pay increments, or were worried they wouldn't because they're at the highest end. And so the thought was, should we include a statement? And so here it is that's saying, yes, if we're saying 1%, everybody gets the 1% on their base pay, regardless where they are in relation to a hiring schedule or placement schedule or any of those schedules. If we say 1%, it means 1%. All right, so that is the recommendations and what is for the inflation funding and the growth of students. So that is a guarantee. There's nothing changing on that. We have fought a lawsuit. We've won a lawsuit. We've negotiated a lawsuit. Funding of inflation is required, and so that is what is in that beginning. Now talks about other things that we've heard. So from beginning in January, the governor came out with a restoration of the district additional assistance. So that's what DAA, I apologize for my acronyms, but DAA Restore is a 5-year restoration of the district additional assistance. So many people don't know district additional assistance because I normally call it capital, and that is the district has cut about $15 million on an annual basis from the budget, from the Great Recession. It started and grew, and about 4 years ago it got to a $15 million cut. So we only receive about $60 per student for capital funding, and that's created something that this board has heard me say many times. We have a capital problem. You can hold your breath for a little while. You can't hold it forever. This was great news when this came out, which was a 5-year restoration, which has about $3.8 million in the first year for the Peoria Unified School District on the DA restoration. With that, you can move it to, you can keep it in capital and use it for capital. You can move it to M&O. And previously, when there was no cuts, the district, as did most districts, moved a lot of the capital into M&O from that standpoint. Very few districts had it all in capital. So it's nothing wrong or nothing different than having some of your district additional assistance in M&O. The additional here is a 8% classroom increase. And so that is something that came out at the end, which was an expansion of last year when we went through and we had to revise our budget in November. That was for the 1.06. Towards the end, it was, hey, let's move that up to 9%. So we already had the 1.06 that was in the budget. This is adding 8% to get to the 9% for what the governor is asking for classroom teacher increase. And so that is a bone of contention in lots of different groups and towards our budget team of that is very difficult that they've now only identified classroom teachers. And to be honest, I heard lots back in December. When it was December 15th, we paid a stipend to those classroom teachers, and I received lots of emails about people about why they didn't receive it, that were not classroom teachers.
And so just to clarify that, a classroom teacher with the roster of students that they have to see on a daily basis?
That has been the definition that I've heard. I have not used that because the law says anybody coded to 1,000. So I'm not a synergy expert, and I don't know every single person that does or doesn't have a roster. I don't know, do PE teachers have rosters or band? It is those that are coded to a 1,000, which is in the classroom, is what the Auditor General and the guidance we received from the law was passed, and that we followed that law. I don't know if that answers the question, to be quite honest.
It does. When we move forward, I would like to see how many teachers fall under the 1,000 code and how many certified teachers do not fall under that.
Okay. So with that, those definitions, those additional funds, the recommendations are as follows. So one, increase the school capital allocations from the previous year. So our schools, when we made the cut to the final district additional cut that was made 4 years ago, we cut their budgets about 55%. We cut every department. We cut everybody 55%. This is going back to the schools and increasing that by 25%, so restoring some of their funds. There's an increase in IT, maintenance, transportation, athletics, and arts. The total increase between all three of those is about $370,000. And this is to start restoring some of those capital budgets so that they are able to start doing some of those capital needs that they have. With that, we can move some to M&O, and so now you have some movement to the M&O side, which is to increase the base pay of eligible classified staff. That sounded a little redundant there, by 2.4%. So before they were getting the 1%, it's now moving to 3.4%. Increase the base pay of administrative staff, so our administrators going from 1%, adding 2.2, so they would go to 3.2%. Increase the certified staff related services. And so this was where we've had a lot of conversation. Our related services are our psychs, OTs, PTs, speech pathologist, and I think it's BCBA. I'm not, it is, they keep telling me it is. That sounds like a weird position name. But those positions would get an increase of 4%. So where they got 1, it is now going up to 5. Increased base pay of the certified staff non-classroom. And so these are instructional coaches, guidance counselors, and that is increasing that from 1%, adding 6.6 to go into 7.6%. As was requested or part of the budget process from the governor's side, which was to increase the certified classroom teachers, so those coded to 1,000, by the 9.6%. And so that would add that to the 1%, so they'd be getting the 10.06. This also part of the process that was requested and lived throughout all the changes and cuts I'm sorry it's cut off a little bit, was to increase our certified work calendar for one protected day, one teacher protected day, meaning that we'll add 1 day to their calendar, and that is for teachers. So a lot of this comments where teachers are here anyway, why don't you pay us for the day we come in extra to get our classrooms ready to do that, but don't add a day and have administration take that day and use it for whatever they want. Not that they don't have good things or valuable things to do. They wanted to get in and get paid for that day. And so that is part of this request too. Now with that, if classified is moving up to 3.4% base pay increase, we are recommending, if this is the budget recommendation that goes through, we're adjusting the classified minimum increase to 10.65 because that increase of the 3.4 will get them up. And so the frees that aren't getting that are getting moved up to $11 moves down from $10.90 down to $10.65. So I know that gets a little confusing, but that's in line with the Prop 206 and to be in compliance with that. So I know that's a little confusing, but that's really just an adjustment of we went from 1% to 3.4%, so it slides downwards so that they're not getting a greater raise in that sense. Now this is something that was approved by the governing board on a previous board meeting. I believe it was back in February that our governing board approved increasing the record retention stipends for certified and classified staff. As a reminder, administration do not receive this, and so this went from $250 to $400 for certified staff, and it went from $75 to $125 for classified staff. They must sign the contract within the time frame and must be here in August to also receive it, so they have to show up next year. And that's part of the requirement. Now, we don't really talk too much about it in budget team about this because this is really just for certified staff and it has a non-supplanting, so we really shouldn't be talking about it because you don't want one going up because the other is. And so this is just a calculation. I normally let the certified staff know about it, but we have our Fund 11 and Fund 13. Sales have gone up. The economy is doing a little bit better, and so sales tax growth has gone up. And so it produces an increase in our Fund 11 and Fund 13. Those are classroom site funds. Those are funded. That was approved by Prop 301 back in 2000. And so this was one that was a surprise legislative to just mix in a legislative change, which was an extension of this. And so this has this extending for another 20 years. And so that's good in that sense that we don't have to worry about the funding cliff. It did not increase any funding. From that standpoint, it kept everything pretty much the same. It just extended it. But you see these amounts going up. And so what that means, just for clarity, is the average teacher, because they all get different varying amounts in the Fund 11 and Fund 13, but the average teacher gets about $1,397 in 11 and $2,794 in Fund 13. Those are both going up to $1,470 and $2,940 on average. So we will just run through a 5.2% increase on those supplemental lines for everybody so they could see it. You could see that the average increase is about $219.
And this is per year, not paycheck, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Madam President, for making that distinction, that we would not be able to afford that kind of increase in that sense. Also, just following along with that, the other part of that, which is Fund 12, is performance pay. So for those eligible certified right now, this year, I believe last meeting you approved the $2,600. With those amounts going up next year, we're recommending that go up to $2,800. And for admin, no change. That's going to stay exactly the same as it has for the last 5 years. So that is the main budget that we're talking about. And so those are the increases, where they're coming in and where they're going and what we're recommending. So I know at the previous agenda item, you were talking about financial landscape changing. It's not changing a lot because it's all going to stay in compensation. It's not doing a lot. As we talked at our budget team, it was an extensive process, but we did start with benefits and we didn't go in, but in January, we said, what is our priorities? What is our goals that we want to accomplish in our recommendation? Do we want to attract more, which is changing the hiring schedules super high that everybody wants to come here? Now that consequence is that you have to fund that, and that costs money, which means now we're giving money to people that don't work here to come here. And our process, and we even said, do we want to look at, I go around to employee chats, as I said, I hear from coaches, athletic coaches on a regular basis that say, when are you ever going to change that salary schedule? And so I hear that a lot. And so we bring it up. Do we want to? And the difficulty is that when you're starved for so long, you really need to feed the primary source, and that's the positions and the compensation that's for everybody, trying not to carve out as much as possible in that sense. And so we came together in January, and it came that our number one concern is to take care of the people that work here now, not the people that we're trying to recruit in on that sense, is to take care of our employees and those that have been here for a long time, that have dedicated and given so much. And so that was the whole focus, and that is how we went through. Did we consider everything at any one time, either through email. Sorry, Barb, I know you send me lots of emails. I didn't mean to point at you, but they're encouraged, and we talk about anything and everything about that. And so, are they considered? Everything is considered. We look at everything that anybody wants to bring up. There's nothing that we're going to shy away from in that sense, because we do want to make the most informed decision in that sense. And so that is what we went through, and we made that recommendation. I'll try to explain some of the contingent budgets. They're can be very confusing in that sense. So,
do you mind if we just pause for just a moment?
Yes, of course.
Mrs. Doan, Mr. Sandoval, Ms. Kinnick, do you have any questions on that first part? It's a lot of information.
A lot of work. A lot of work. So
Yeah, it is. I just
Sandoval.
thank you, Madam President, Mr. Hicks. Thank you, sir, and your team, and all those who sat on the committee. Certainly appreciate your diligence and time spent. Quick question, and this may be related to another discussion, but looking at some of the recommendations, special education staff changes, reducing K through 8 by 3. One of the things that, when we talked about our staffing study session, or it was one of the items there, I just want to make sure, Mr. Savoy, I know this discussion you and I have had as well. When we take a look at our schools, and every site has its own story, and we take a look at the Title I schools, et cetera, as we appropriate our dollars and, reduce staff who are critical to those sites and even classroom sizes, I know we have regulation, we have our policy, but, based on, certain dynamics, within a campus, I want to ensure that, again, I use the term humanizing that data, that, we, even look at our policy around classroom sizes at those sites, appropriate those dollars accordingly to ensure that we're putting our staff, our teachers, and students in a successful position at those sites that have those dynamics that some of our other campuses don't.
Madam President, members of the board, I was there at the board meeting when you guys talked about policies. The first thing is to make that change right now means that we can't give these raises, and we're going to hire more people instead of giving more money. And so I think the first thing I said to Mr. Savoy was, please work through that, work through the board, but that should be for the following year and not for this coming year, because we've spent so much time to come in at the end and say, hey, let's change this classroom size down by 2. It could mean 13 more teachers. We can't afford that within, which means now we have to reduce all the compensation increases to people to afford something like that. So that should be a very methodical process that you've started already. You asked some good questions. That should be working through that process in that sense.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that, when we start off a school year, we're not collapsing classes and moving students around where they've established a relationship with those teachers, and then we kind of put them in that adverse situation. So, but I understand what you're saying.
Madam President, members of the board, I will tell you, it is horrible. I have been to a school and we get assigned and we go around to be there the first day, and even before the first day, and we just took out somebody that's maybe been there 6, 7 years, and lo and behold, 3 weeks down the road, the students show up and then they get a student, then they get a teacher. Following the guidelines you provided, now they just fill that with a brand new teacher, as opposed to somebody that's been part of their campus for 3, 4, 5 years. It is very difficult. It is something we try to avoid at all costs. I will tell you, with the current year environment and with funding going down, and that this has been put and thrust upon us to make those decisions. Does it happen a lot? I don't know, Mr. Savoy, if you know how many times we collapsed a class and moved around. We don't move students around too much in that sense, but they could get split if there's 14 kids in a class, maybe split them up between the other 2 or other 3 or other 4. Could it happen? It is something we try to avoid at all costs. And my understanding, I'm not in all those meetings, but the executive directors that are making it are fighting tooth and nail to do what's best for their students in that sense.
Gotcha. Yeah, and again, and I absolutely value, the process that you've been going through to come up with these budgets. But, my only ask is this, and to equal kind of what you just said, is that we're just very thoughtful, about those sites that have, those dynamics that we need to consider when we're looking at staffing, those schools.
Madam President, members of the board, if I could give another example, intervention specialists. Is that the right name? Sorry, I know I should know all this better, but I get it wrong every time. We spent 3 or 4 meetings talking about should we hire intervention specialists across, and maybe start them with the highest free and reduced, those Title I schools. We ultimately backed off of that because we also want if we're going to add positions, they better be successful, and people better be transparent, and it better be evident that it was the right decision to do. And so ultimately, we could not make that recommendation because we didn't have the time and ability to see that through, to make sure that bringing those positions back would be successful in that nature. And we did not want to waste the money in that sense. And so that is very thoughtful that we come through not just in where to allocate, but is it going to be successful and have the intended impact in that sense.
Madam President.
Ms. Connect.
Mr. Hicks, is that the same situation as social workers? Because we had talked about maybe adding social workers to our staff.
Madam President, members of the board, it was talked about once, but it never made the final list, and I don't remember purposely taking it off. I don't know if there was just never funds about it, but I don't know if the special ed recommendation came in not looking at that or not in that sense. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
It didn't really.
Sorry.
Madam President, members of the board, Mr. Hicks, it was discussed early on, but it did not gain traction, as I recall, with the group. To Mr. Sandoval's question on the special education, that reduction of 3 is primarily in the programs of self-contained children. And the reason for that is really seeing less children needing that level of service, which could be construed as a good thing, that students don't need that level of service and their needs can be met within the general school population. So we see that as a positive trend in those instances. And just on the addition and collapse, I was looking at the data from last year. At the beginning of the school year last year, we added 32 teachers, and we collapsed 17 classes over a period of time from the beginning of August to the beginning of September. So again, having to be very, very sensitive to the current year funding that Mr. Hicks spoke about earlier, that we're only funded for the students that we have to be very, very careful that we don't exceed the number of people that we can pay based on the number of students that are enrolled. And so that's a process that we go through working with everyone. In addition to that, I would just say that over the last couple of meetings, I look forward to working with the board, myself and our team, to take a deeper dive into this over the summer, early fall, so that the direction that the board may have for us, we can incorporate that. We enter that budget cycle in October for next year.
Madam President, and Mr. Savoy, Mr. Hicks, thank you both for that. That was one example, and I think, look, you know, overall, our mantra as a district is every student, every day, right? And we want to make sure that we put each and every one of those individuals in a position to be successful. So again, you know, my only ask is, you know, I agree. You know, I'm not trying to call anybody out. I want to make sure that we work together to be compassionate and sensitive, you know, to those situations that some of these sites represent. Thank you.
Ms. Stone, do you have any questions on that first part? Okay, excellent. And I will echo Mr. Sandoval's comments. I had the same question actually about the self-contained, so I appreciate Mr. Savoy clarifying that information. And I believe the board has said when we created a committee that we would honor a lot of their work, and so all the 6 months and extra time that you guys have put in, I appreciate that information and look forward to future study sessions so that we're prepared going into the new year with the class size.
Madam President, members of the board, I would also, just to take some more time of everybody's here, we know it's not perfect. We are dealt very difficult hands to have to make difficult choices, and we do the best job we possibly can, but I think we have created a safe environment that we're able to question everything. It changes. I will tell you, when we look at the summary recommended compensation study, summary by category, when we get to that point, that probably is on its like 12th iteration based on feedback. Is a part of the team's responsibility is to go out and share some of this and get some input and see what everybody is. And our second to last meeting on that Monday, it was pretty heated and pretty difficult, and we said, hey, we don't have a scheduled meeting, but let's just come back in a couple days and see, do we really happy about this and satisfied with where we are? And we weren't. Because when you're working for hours at a time, maybe you get tired, maybe it's going back and forth, but maybe you go have clearer heads, or maybe you just get some more input and feedback. I know I did that morning talking to counselors in that sense, and we made some changes. And so we looked at a lot of that feedback. We come back, and so it's a constant iteration of looking, doing the best we can, verifying the numbers, maybe getting some feedback and making changes as we go in that sense. And so it's a constant, continuous improvement process that we're trying to make it better every step of the way. And we hope every iteration was a little bit better than the last one in that sense.
I think it's great. I mean, the only suggestion I have, and the only concern I have, is that I'm really feeling like not having any social workers in the Peoria Unified School District is a deficit. I know that our sister school districts have that. I think that would be a tremendous support for not only our students, but our staff members as well, and the broader community. It's not just a social emotional issue, it's also an academic issue, and it's a safety issue.
Thank you very much.
I know that in 2013 we cut our behavior specialists, so I know we have some back data that identifies how much what the expense was. So if we could take a look at our behavior specialists to our social worker specialists and figure out if there is room for that. But I understand from past conversations that if we choose to go down that road, we would then be potentially cutting a percentage increase from one of the buckets that the committee has made a recommendation for.
Madam President, members of the board, as it is right now, we do have a little bit of cushion. I want to say there's about $200,000 unallocated in this. Part of it is because I like to round down on round up on expenses and down on revenues. But we also building a budget based on growth, and so meeting the kids there. Could something be done with that? It could, but then that means you're budgeting exactly to could bleed into carry forwards and other concerns and potentially overspending in a year. So we could definitely look at that. The behavior specialists, I believe there are a lot of those, and so that would definitely not be able to come back as is in that sense. But I believe the social work that was presented was not one for every school or every other school. It was a social work network program that would provide some resources and interventions in that sense. But we could definitely talk to Mr. Savoy that you could always add a little bit if we have cushion, and we have a couple $100,000 cushion. Anything beyond that would create a structural deficit that I'd be concerned about.
My fantasy is one per cluster or one per high school. And I know that can't happen, but if we could squeeze one or two or three out of the budget, I think that would be good.
Madam President, members of the board, yes, it's easy to say that up here. I would say we do need to think what does that program look like? You have to set them up for success. You don't want to just hire somebody and they're just sitting around hopefully doing something good that may or may not be hitting the target, because we all have different expectations. That should be clearly delineated out before we do that. So I could ask Mr. Savoy and his team to look at that and come back with a recommendation, but I do get nervous about making decisions and changes on the fly like this about something like that I don't want to set up people I want to set them up for success and not for failure.
Understood.
And there's some programs, too, that we can look at where if we hire one or two and have a pipeline of interns from the universities come in and serve while they service our students. So we can take a look at that. I can show you some resources. Anything else?
Yes, Madam President, thank you. So, Mr. Hicks, I know we've had this discussion before. As we take a look at our budget, one of the line items is benefits. I know I've been told that we have the absolute best health benefits that can be offered, to our teachers and staff. If that's the case, that's great. But it's not a bad thing, to make that line item competitive, meaning, going out for bid and just seeing what's out there. If we currently have the best, that's great. But I would love to see, what else is out there to see if possibly we can make it even better, going from good to great, right?
Madam President, members of the board, as I've said, we could do that all the time. Now, we're self-insured, and so really the conversation, I've had this with many staff members as well, is what level of funding. That's where it comes down to. So when I dig in a little bit more, what do you mean about benefits? We have a great plan. I know that our cost of care is as low as anywhere, but that doesn't mean the cost of that employee was better than anywhere else.
Right.
You could have another employee that pays 100% of everything and they don't pay anything. That doesn't mean that the actual service was better. It just means they're paying for more in that sense. So there's different layers of what we're talking about when it comes to benefits to examine that.
Sure, no, agreed. And I think that I welcome that discussion to really dig in.
Sounds like a future agenda item.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. I wanted to talk about it now, but we'll do it in the future. Because it is appropriate to budget talks, right? I mean, we can talk about that. Because I have a question about that. Why are school district employees not in the same plan as the other state employees?
Madam President, members of the board, that's a great timely topic. I don't know if you read the Republic about 3 weeks ago when you had ASU and U of A asking to leave the state plan because it was too costly and they were losing money. So if you remember, it looks like there was someone else who read the article. If you look at the article, self-funded plan, they were doing really great. The state kept all the money. So they were like, hey, we're doing great. Why are our rates keep going up 6-7%? And when they looked at their experience for their people, rates shouldn't go up at all.
Because I had a constituent ask me that they thought that the state employees were getting a better deal.
Well, then why is ASU and U of A asking to leave it?
Didn't you read that article?
Yeah, so really, it goes back to, the employees that asked me saying, I have friends, they're with Maricopa County. My wife's with Maricopa County. Our family coverage is like $100 a month. That's dynamite. They're not with me, they're with her because the cost is so low. That doesn't mean the actual health care provided. If she breaks a hip and I break a hip, whose was better? I know ours, overall, the actual cost is lower than theirs, but they're subsidizing and paying for more. That doesn't mean they have a better healthcare plan or better service. It just means they're paying for more. And so we could look, so that's why I'm saying we should always look at the different layers and what that means to take on the surface and say we should join the state when others are trying to leave the state. First of all, we can't join the state, but just on the surface, people don't know all that.
Yeah, well,
and it's what level of funding do they have is a different question on that. And it's okay to have that question, but we should know up front what the question is we're looking at.
But my question is why is it that no school districts do that? Why do others? I'm sure other states have it so that all state employees, even if they're employed by a school district, have a state-run healthcare system.
And Madam President, members of the board, it's because we're not state employees. We're local education agencies, and we each are independent in that sense. And so that is why we're not embedded into the state plan as
Because
is.
of that, because of that.
Because of how our state was set up and the structure of our agencies in that sense. But could be a future agenda item.
Yes, and I believe another governing board member had mentioned that as well, to do a full all-day side-by-side comparison, looking at the state numbers and going forward. But that is a summer study session.
So if it's all right, if we can just jump out to the other attachment, and I'll just read through some of the words that were on the contingent budget. And so really, so just so you understand, and this is something we've done previous years, is whenever there's any additional funds provided by the state budget, it shall go to increase the base pay of all groups unless specifically designated for a purpose that is not for all staff. So if there's something we haven't thought about and during this negotiation time and something comes out and it's different than what we anticipate right now, and if it's open for any use, it's going to be split between all staff, unless we can't. We're going to follow the law. So like what happened last year is we approved a budget. Additional funds were provided because during the late hours, somebody said, I want to give classroom teachers more money, and we said we'll give 1.06. If it was free and we could have given it to everybody, we would have spread it and given it to everybody, but because the law was specific, we followed the law, and so that's the same as what we're asking, and this is to do that. Changes, if there's any changes in the state budget allocation pertaining to the district additional assistance restoration, that will be reduced proportionally. So if we don't receive the full, if we don't receive the 3.8 and they cut that down, some of the worry was they were going to cut district additional assistance to move it over to compensation to give salaries to staff. We were saying we're going to reduce those proportionally, that we were allocating that district additional assistance into that M&O and capital side. And then if the additional increase for the classroom teachers is not approved and that doesn't happen, then we would go with an alternative recommendation. That alternative recommendation would mean that the assumption of the DAA restoration, fully funded, there were some assumptions there and other monies given to non-teachers. If the DAA restore, wait, let me go back. If the 9% doesn't happen to teachers, we do not want to reallocate the DAA restoration to everybody, not to mostly everybody but teachers, because they just got shorted what we anticipated them getting fully. We should not be giving it to others, primarily others. We should go back and relook at that. And so that would probably cause coming back to the governing board and saying, hey, this did not happen as we thought it would. We should come back and look at these allocations. And I always put in a blurb that the state budget is less than the 1.77% for inflation. We think it's going to be pretty close to that. But if it doesn't come in and it's a little bit lower, what we're saying is let's just use some of our budget balance carry forward and not come back and reduce it down. Instead of saying a 1% increase to everybody, we're not going to jump it down to 0.9%. That's where we're at. We're just going to use budget balance carry forward, which could mean a one-year structural deficit, but it will be addressed in the following year's budget. And then if the increases proposed by the governor do not happen, some of those increases won't happen. So there's a lot of contingencies in here, and so this is what I wanted to walk through. Sorry, I just noticed a note I had. There was something that I left out of this, and so if there is a recommendation tonight, if I could just ask for the recommendation be as presented. And so what that was is that our maintenance department had an increase of 1 grade from an 18 to a 19 to align with all other supervisors. They have a supervisor that is not at a 19, and then they have a decrease of positions from it, that another 18 down to 15 and a 13. And so I'm sorry, 2 increases and 1 decrease. 1 decrease going from an 18 down to 15, 1 increase from 11 to 12, and 1 from an 18 to 19. So there's 3 different things happening, 2 increases, 1 decrease. Has almost no budget effect because the down and the ups, but it was not put in the handouts, and so this is new to the board presentation right now, but I'm asking, that was my fault that I left it out. And so just to be clear, that's 3 increases to maintenance, and that is reclassifying their positions, 11 to a 12, an 18 to a 19, and an 18 down to a 15, to be clear. So I apologize for interrupting that. I just noticed one of my mistakes. So so what we talked about, so I wanted to summarize because I know it was lots of lines, it was on lots of different pages, and it's hard to follow all the different things. And so I highlighted in gray the assumption if we're getting the full inflation, if we're building with growth, and then we have the district additional assistance restoration, which is the 3.8, and then the 8% increase for the classroom teachers, what that would look like from our budget team. And so here you could see this is a little different than been presented before because we now have 3 certified areas, the certified classroom teacher, the certified non-classroom teacher, and the certified related services, and then the classified, and then the admin down below. And so from each different line, you could see what that means. And so just to summarize, and it is very important to note that these are on the base pay that we're talking the increases. Base pay going up 1%. The governor's plan has a 9.06%. That's going to classroom teachers on their base pay, not on all pay. The classroom site fund average, so I wanted to convert that. That's the average increase is a 0.44%. So when we say $219 increase, what does that mean? The extra work day is about a 0.54 to everybody. The average retention stipend is about 0.3 based on the average salary in the district, which means the total increase for our classroom teachers is 11.34% if all 3 of those things happen. Certified non-classroom teachers, as a reminder, that's our instructional coaches and our guidance counselors. I think it's just those. And that has a base pay of 7.6%, the classroom site fund average of 0.44, average retention stipend increase is about 2.25, which means their total increase is at the 8.29%. Certified related services, so as a reminder, that is the psychologists, OTs, PTs, speech pathologists, and the BCBA that has an average increase of 5%. On the base pay, or has a base pay increase of 5%, average retention stipend increase of 0.25 for a total increase of 5.25. Our classified would see a base pay increase of 3.4. The average retention stipend increase is 0.17 for a total increase of 3.5, and admin base pay increase of just 3.2, and that is the only increase. So that's a summary of those. Now you could see if each one of the scenarios doesn't happen. So if the 8% doesn't happen, there's a redistribution of how we're looking at that. And it moves to a 1.85% to all groups, and then continuing with some of the others. The 1.06 stays in there because that was approved in last year's budget. That was, so he has an increase of 9%, but the 1.06 stays in this year's budget. You still have the same CS, the classroom site fund, the extra work day, the average retention for the 4.19. You have the non-classroom teachers at 2.54, related services at 2.1, classified at 3.57, and admin just at the 1.85. And so you can see each scenario is assuming now, without the district additional assistance and without the 8% increase, what would that look like? And so that's just the 1%. You see for the certified classroom teachers down to 1.74, 1.69 for the non-classroom teacher certified, 1.25 for the related services, 1.7 for classified, and 1% for admin. And then without just the DAA restoration, still has the 8% in there, so you're looking at this classroom teachers at 10.8, 1.69 for the certified non-classroom, 1.25 for the related services, classified at 1.17, and admin at 1%, and then an alternative budget. Now, I will tell you that the 4.06, that was just a guess. That was a part of our budget team. We said, well, what if the governor's plan cuts something like that during it? And so I just picked 4.06. That is not out there that, hey, this could be cut in half in that sense. But it was to look at, if that did get cut, what would it look like? So that is purely an estimate. In this situation, I believe the alternative budget would probably require us to come back to the board because it's really a flexible number that we don't know if it's something other than some of those plans in that sense. And it doesn't fall within the contingency of giving it to everybody, that it's more money in that sense that wasn't accounted for. So although it identifies the 7.19, the 3.69, the 3.25, and the 3.57, and the 3% for admin, I do believe that would be something that we would probably need to come back to the governing board to reaffirm where those increases are at. So I wanted to provide some kind of matrix so you could see with the different scenarios where we are at for all those different increases. I'll stand for any questions.
Well, thank you very much, and I do appreciate you going through all that, and especially providing the scenarios. We'll go ahead and start with questions. Ms. Connect?
I'm very impressed with the level of work and the multiple scenarios there. I'm prepared to support it and approve it tonight, but with the contingency that we do have some conversations about the possibility of bringing some social workers onto the staff.
Mr. Sandoval?
Mr. Hicks and team, thank you again. I mean, there's no doubt there's a lot of work in a kind of a if then then that scenarios, right? Quick question though, the retention stipend, how the percentage, how is that determined?
That's used, so there was an increase from $250 to $400. That's 150, just taking 150 times our average teacher, or divided by our average teacher salary, gave the estimated increase for retention stipend.
And that kind of follows suit all the way down to each?
For the classroom site fund and the average retention, that is purely what's the fixed amount divided by the average salary. Okay. So I guess I'm trying to, let me be a little more explicit. It's going to be different for everybody. That's the average increase. Those that make less than the average salary will get, it's a percentage higher. Those that make more will get a percentage lower.
I gotcha. Okay. For me, in a similar discussion that we had earlier, you know, when Dr. Davidson was speaking, it's, there's no doubt there's a lot of work that's been put into this. You know, I think, and there's still some information that's yet to come. So, I mean, you know, if, you know, we go through this and decide to move forward and improve these scenarios, you know, I would definitely love the opportunity to your point, Mr. Hicks, because I'm assuming the words at the bottom of the sheet are supposed to read preliminary amounts. That I don't know if it's, I don't know, Linda, I'm not sure what the proper term is here, but once we get more information, would love some type of official communication to the board around now what, you know, what does it really look like, and what are we in front of to, you know, for, you know, all of our teachers and staff moving forward. And I don't know if it even makes sense, you know, with that information. I mean, you know, do we have the opportunity to even, you know, consider options or even, you know, have a vote on them?
Madam President, members of the board, great question or comment about the communication. Failure to mention, how would we communicate that? So normally, last year, this is the process we've been using, which is normally we finish before the budget, because there's been years that the legislature doesn't finish until June, one time July. In that sense. And so I normally use the analogy of two trains running down the track. At one point, they have to come together. We're going to come over to them first, normally because we finish first, and we'd like to know what our where we're going to be. And we normally know where we're at right now. I've talked with the governor's office on at least weekly, but more often than that, talking to lobbyists where we're at. Obviously, anything can happen when it goes into the dark nights before they approve a budget. Who knows what's going to happen? What we normally do is, if the board is inclined to improve this tonight, we normally send out an email, preliminary, here's the initial. Last year we were required, as part of 1.06, we were required to send emails to all staff. We can include the governing board in those communications, but what we heard through all the staff, which was, and thank you for Ms. Barkas for creating a guide on how to calculate what your actual increase was. We did a very poor job last year of actually communicating what people's actual increase was, as they might have heard at a board meeting, hey, I got a 1% and now I'm getting a 1.0. Did I really get a 1%? How is that? And so working with our payroll and HR departments has identified a way to go back out. We did electronic contracts this year, as we've done, and so we're going to create a notification to all employees once it's official of here's what the budget was, here's what was approved, here's what the governor and the legislature approved, and what that means for you. And so it'll give a line by line of their actual increase year over year specifically. And so when that is actually happening, I think what I'm hearing from the board is like they would like to know those official communications that are happening to the staff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ms. Stone?
I don't have any questions. I really appreciate the hard work of you and your team and the thoroughness. I can't imagine the headache, all the budget stuff, but it looks well thought out, well studied, and I appreciate your work.
We do have questions from the public. I would like just to reserve my comments until the very end, if you don't mind. We'll start with Ms. Patty Davis Moore.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Pallas Thompson, administrators, colleagues, and community members. My name is Patty Davis Moore, and I'm the head guidance counselor at Peoria High School. This is my 19th year at Peoria High School, first as a teacher, now as a guidance counselor. And for 19 years, I've signed a teacher contract. When you think about guidance counselors, you think, okay, establish a 4-year plan with the kids, meet with them, get the classes they need, make sure they get them to graduation, align to their 4-year plan, support them along the way. Pretty good day, right? The reality of the situation is that's the tiniest bit of what we are required to do. We are required to be social workers, test coordinators, master schedule builders, teachers. Yes, we teach. We go in the classroom. We teach every kid that comes in our office. We are mentors. We are mediators. We are administrators. And most importantly, we are advocates for our kids. Our kids come to us because they need food. They need clothes. They need shoes. They need deodorant and shampoo, eyeglasses and hearing aids, and sometimes a place to sleep at night, which many of us have provided them. But most, they need us to love them and support them and to be their voice, to stick up for them when no one else will. A student comes to a guidance counselor when she's done. She's had enough. The darkness is closed in, and she's at the end. She's given up. But she comes to her guidance counselor because she knows that she'll be listened to and taken seriously, and that counselor will call the crisis intervention team for the 4th time and will continue to call child services until that child gets what she needs. The guidance counselors are the ones that drive down to Central Phoenix to the hospital to support the family and the student whose parent is terminal. The guidance counselor is the one responsible when the refugee walks onto their campus and knows one word of English. Hi. That kid never learned to read and write in her own language. It's the guidance counselor who has to figure out what to do with a kid who can't speak English, can't read and write in her own language. That guidance counselor goes to the elementary school and gets kindergarten level books, gets lesson plans from kindergarten level teachers to support the teachers on our campus and support that kid. It's also the guidance counselor that she comes to and shows the bruises and the unspeakable things that are happening to her in her foster home because she knows that that person has a voice for her. These are the burdens that we bear. The counselors in every school in our district. They go home with us at night. They keep us up till all hours of the morning. And sometimes they push us to wonder if we truly can go back the next day, because it's too much. There are too few resources. There are no social workers to help. There are phenomenal psychologists that are split between campuses. We do go back every day because we have a responsibility to those kids that we take seriously, and to our schools, and to our teachers and our administrators. We go back because that's our passion and our calling. That's what we're here to do. We've committed to that. Please, before you agree on this budget, come and talk to us. Sit with us. We would be happy as a group or as individuals to meet with every one of you so that you truly understand what happens on our campuses, what falls on our shoulders that is far outside our job description, that we take on willingly because it benefits our kids. Governor Ducey and his legislators may not value us. They don't understand what we do, and they certainly don't care about us. But you should, because we work hard for you. And the budget on the table, especially the contingency plans, it's not fair to a group of people who are required to have a master's degree, who sign teacher contracts, again for next year, who work selflessly and empty their pockets for our kids. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next is Julie Ferneman. Thank you. And I apologize for not saying at the beginning. I know that we have a list of guest speakers, and generally the time frame is 3 minutes. So we would definitely like to hear your comments, and we would be more than happy to follow up as well. So.
Well, Patty's going to be pretty hard to follow. Good evening, Peoria Governing Board members, community, and staff. My name is Julie Furman. I am a guidance counselor at Cactus High School, and I'm proud to say that I'm finishing my 20th year with the Peoria Unified School District. I dedicated my first 17 years as a classroom teacher, and I'm currently finishing my 3rd year as a counselor. Upon being hired to PUSD, I immediately started establishing roots. I bought my first house in the district so my children would be able to attend our outstanding schools. As my family grew, I bought my second home in the district to ensure we would continue to be a Peoria family. I've been outspoken as a parent and as an employee singing the district's praises. I've never experienced the desire to look outside the district to continue my career until recently. During my years as a classroom teacher, I've had many students seek me out to confide abuse, dating violence, eating disorders, self-harming behavior, homelessness, substance abuse, and gender identity issues, just to name a few. I came to the realization that if I was willing to put in the extra time and expense to become a guidance counselor, I could devote more time to these needs. I could teach students coping strategies, educate them about resources, and advocate for them to make sure their most basic needs are met. My husband and I discussed the sacrifices my family would have to make financially and to our time together. Ultimately, we decided it was an important ambition, and everyone made adjustments as needed. I'm happy to report that I did well in my program, and I am a certified school counselor. When an opening in the Cactus Guidance Department presented itself, I excitedly poured over the job posting, minimum requirements, a master's degree, a guidance certificate from ADE, and previous classroom experience. Next, I looked over the essential duties and responsibilities. The prospect of combining my classroom experience with my newly acquired skills was very exciting. Lastly, pay scale. This position is paid on the teacher's salary schedule. It was a little surprising that a position that required a higher level of education and additional certification beyond that of a teacher was paid on the same schedule, but I was not deterred. My colleagues at Cactus took a chance on me. I've enjoyed my short time as a counselor, but I've come to the realization that the level of responsibility and liability associated with this position is significant. When I was a classroom teacher, all those scary and potentially deadly situations I mentioned earlier were forwarded to the school counselor. Now, I am the school counselor, trusted with navigating those difficult, complicated issues. Add to that monitoring grades, discipline, attendance, post-secondary plans, and graduation requirements for the 391 students on my caseload, which includes over 50 504 students for which I am the case manager. No one forced me out of the classroom. It was my choice to seek out such an important position. What no one told me is that I was agreeing to lesser compensation than other certificated colleagues. I realized Governor Ducey's parameters for the 1% stipend given to teachers last year excluded counselors, but other districts found a way to include counselors because it was the right thing to do. I've recently learned that the board will be voting on a budget proposal that gives a higher percentage raise to classroom teachers than it does to counselors. Please help me to understand the rationale for this. It is so disheartening that my position, which requires more education and has more liability, would warrant less compensation. I want to continue being a part of the Peoria family, but it is also important to work for a school district where counselors are considered equals to their certified colleagues and compensated accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Candace Schultz.
Good evening, Board, Madam President, and Ms. Pallas-Thompson, administrators, colleagues. My name is Candace Schultz, and I am a guidance counselor at Cactus High School. I have been in this district for 28 years, my entire career. I started as a 7th grade math and history teacher, and although I loved that job, after 12 years of teaching, and realizing that I spent all of my free time guiding and counseling kids, I realized that my calling was to be in a situation where my teaching occurred one-on-one with students in my office rather than in my classroom. I then went back to school to earn my master's degree in counseling. I started at a time in our district when the entire district shut down for a few hours every August. And as an entire district, we attended our back-to-school presentation by the then superintendent, Dr. Raymond Kellis. I can tell you that even though we were spread out in the Sundome or wherever we met for those gatherings, each of us left that presentation with the excitement of a kid starting each new school year. Each of us, from bus drivers to teachers to administrators, felt valued and part of an integral piece of the school puzzle, with equal importance placed on each and every one of us. Thank you. When Governor Ducey proposed his 20% raise for teachers, I was at the same time ecstatic and disillusioned, discovering that only classroom teachers were eligible for this amazing gift was, as you can imagine, quite concerning for the rest of us who work so hard every day to feel as if we matter to kids as well. However, I understood that the legislature and the governor are far removed from the reality of an actual school and what happens there daily. Therefore, the slight of not being ineligible for this raise inspired me to battle, but I was not hurt personally. What I have banked my entire career on, however, is that my district, the Peoria Unified School District, would see it differently, that each of us matters, that each of us have an impact on the future, that each of us are invaluable to the education of each and every student. So you will understand my concern with the budget proposals set before you tonight, as each proposal distinguishes one group from another, one group as more valuable than another, one group as more worthy of a significant increase, while the rest should settle for less. This is not what the district that I have been in for 28 years was founded on, and I ask you as a board to understand that when you make decisions.
Thank you for your time, all of you, for joining us. As we discussed earlier, the proposals that were presented in front of us and the unknowns at the state level, I still truly believe that it requires more time to seeing what's being presented. I do recall last year, Mr. Hicks, there was some questioning on how the governor strictly proposed that raise to certain teachers. And again, you have identified it tonight that it was under bucket 1,000. I've also heard our teachers unanimously across the board saying their number one request is for student support, behavior specialists, counseling, interventionists. And based on the description that I've heard this evening and what I've experienced in my years of service, that their guidance counselors and the counselors that are presented for us meet that criteria of what a social worker is, what a behavior specialist is. And so when we go back, at this point, I am still going to propose that we wait for the final numbers and for the budget committee to consider our guidance counselors, if we are going to consider social workers, that they be included in that conversation and the budget presented to us. At this time, I like to be, me personally, fully confident in what I'm agreeing to so that I am held accountable moving forward. Mrs. Connect?
I'm satisfied either waiting or moving forward. I am willing to move forward. The thing is that when we look at percentages, though, you have to factor in it's the percentage of what, right? I mean, that's why we have, this is Kathy's argument, right? It's a percentage of a salary, and that's why we have agreed to have graduated ones. And so my question is, because we don't have any sense of what the average salary we're talking about is in certified non-classroom teacher, we know that that's counselors. What other positions are within there, and how do those salaries, base salaries, compare to certified classroom teachers?
Madam President, members of the board, I do not know the average salary off the top of my head in there. It is instructional coaches and guidance counselors. If I could just to bring a little clarity a little bit, because I've heard from our counselors and they have eloquently identified their level of devotion and support to the student success within our districts. And I've known Ms. Schultz for in excess of 20 years and know how amazing she is and what she does. And so I believe anything and everything she says. But hearing that on Thursday, we came back. What you're seeing is a proposal that was adjusted. This added about 4% more to counselors. And if you look at the extra days, that's the equivalent of 3.5%. In that sense. Now that's to, but they have to do extra work for that. I'm sorry, I don't mean to, sorry, there's not a raise, it's asking, but it's increased compensation in that sense. And so I don't know how many hours we spent on just this alone going back, because we had people say, this isn't fair, and others say, this is what the hand that's being dealt with us. That is what's being given to us. So just so everybody knows, to meet the level of everybody get the same raise, there's not enough funds to do that. So teachers, the 9.06, everybody get a 10%. There's not enough funds to do that. And so you have to start making priorities at that point. And to be honest, I told you, at the last year, we just had certified. Now we have 3 boxes. And so the first thing someone showed, one of the things that we had from our budget team is, good gosh, we're pitting ourselves against each other. It's class warfare, and we're all fighting each other. It's like the watering hole is getting smaller, and everybody's looking at each other. And but that's not, we're not creating that, and we're trying to do the best job we possibly can with that. And I've never said that I think this is the fair for everybody. We had 6 years of people being frozen, or actually the first year of them taking a pay cut and then coming back to normal and then being frozen.
Right.
It is hard in 1 year or at any time to come out of that in that sense. And so that's why it takes us so long. We hear all different stories and all different sides, and people represent. I know we have principals in there that we're talking about, you can't do this to my counselors, you can't do this to my coaches, you can't do this to my classified, and everybody's looking out for everybody in that sense. The reality is there's not enough to give everybody what they deserve. There's not enough to give everybody the exact same and follow the law. And so we're trying to do the very best we possibly can. And I don't want to insult anybody. That is the last thing I want to do. In any of that sense. But we are trying to play the hand that we're dealt as best we possibly can, and it changed over and over and over again because of people making strong cases and it would change. And then somebody else would make another case, and it would change again in that sense. And so it was a very long, drawn-out process. And I know Barb is itching to say a little something. I don't know if she still wants to, but
I don't care, I got thick skin.
Barb was on our budget.
I was. And if you look at the handout that you got that said certified classroom teacher, the one that has all the different compensation scenarios on it, if you look at that, if you look under certified classroom teacher, it does have that extra workday in there that we were always already here doing the work, and we also did not get comp time for it. If you look down at certified non-classroom teacher, which includes counselors, the 7 extra workdays paid is not included in here. And like Ken said, that's about an extra 3.5%, which actually in that column brings their total compensation up to 12.08%, which is actually higher than classroom certified teachers. So I just want to point that out. I know that if we're looking percentage-wise, and that's all we're looking at, that's what that actually brings it to. We had to take those 7 days, that money from somewhere, and that money came from M&O. Because as a budget team, we agreed that it wasn't fair, that they were coming in over the summer, they were expected to do work, and they were not being compensated. So again, trying to make everybody as whole as we can for what we're doing, given what the state legislature gives us as far as a budget. And we do have to work within the law. And that's on us because of the decisions that they make as far as what Ducey is proposing for what he considers classroom teachers. So again, we carved those extra 7 days out, and the cost of those extra 7 days out from the M&O as a whole to make sure that the counselors were compensated for that time.
Not all counselors get those 7 days.
Correct.
The lead counselor stuff. So not all counselors, just the guidance counselors get them. We have lead counselors that are already working those days. They're not getting the 7%, those 7 days.
I'm still confused. So who's working what days are going, what days are coming?
You have a lead counselor or a head counselor, and then you have regular guidance counselors. The guidance counselors are going to work and get paid the 7 days. The head counselors that are mostly here, they were already working those days. And so you can't pay them twice for that. They were working extra 30 days, 20?
We work an extra
30 days. They already work an extra 30 and get paid for those 30. Yes, there's work. Yes, there's a work in that sense.
The argument here is that those 7 days can't be used as that brings us up to 12% because there's a portion of us who will never see
Who don't see that because you're already working. You can't pay twice for the same day. So they're already working the 30 days. They're not going to get the 7 days. So only the counselors that are not the head counselor or will be receiving that increase for delineation.
Is there extra compensation for being a lead counselor?
No.
Yeah.
They get the honor of working an extra 30 days. Yeah.
So as we continue to move forward, the governing board has set some, Ms. Pellis-Thompson, and set some strategic plan goals. One of them being student safety and academic success. As we move forward as a governing board, where do our counselors, which seem to be fulfilling the role of our social workers, behavior specialists, this is where me personally would prefer a study session when we get the final numbers to go over that. But that is just my viewpoint because I want to know. I'm not saying discount all the work. I just need to know. I know our last year when we went through this process, our governor excluded a group of employees that service our students. And other districts were able to move things around, not from that bucket because of the law. They moved things around so that it was equal.
Just for clarification, I called 6, 7 other districts, not a single one did.
Okay.
brought that up during our January, but when I called the other districts, they were not giving additional raises to those that did not receive the 1.06 to backfill it.
Okay.
To those. So I don't know what those are, just the ones around us I called and they said no.
And for me personally, I would like more time because there are so many scenarios, and to backtrack to our employees to say, well, this is what was presented, all these options, and then when it is finalized, we're going with this one, this is how it changed. Governing board members, what are your thoughts?
Mr. Hicks, I'm going to assume throughout the budget process, the counselors, guidance counselors, lead counselors were included in the conversation.
Madam President, members of the board, with 4,000 employees, I would say no, they're not all included in the budget process. We identified a process to identify 9 certified, 6 classified, and 5 administrative to work as representatives for a budget process.
You know, making an assumption that 4,000 associates were included, but at least 1 or 2 representatives, you know, from this group included in the process. No.
Madam President, members of the board, what we ask is each association tell us who is their representatives, and then we have 3 that are not part of any association that have expressed interest, and we include them in. And then really they continue until they don't want to be on it anymore.
Gotcha. What's, I mean, if we take a look at the lead counselors, those who are working the additional 30 days, if we, you know, are talking percentages, and, you know, can we take a look at those individuals, where they're at salary-wise, and what it may take to make them whole or equal to, you know, the 12% that those who are going to work the additional 7 days will receive?
So just to be clear, are we only talking counselors, or are we talking all certified?
Well, you know, if it's me, you know, my certainly conversations with Ms. Pallas Thompson was, you know, equal across the board. But, you know, I think there's no doubt that this group, these individuals, you know, make a huge impact with regard to our students, and absolutely our classroom teachers do as well, the crossing guards, everybody, you know, 100%, all have a hand in the success of our students without question. There are a lot of scenarios here and numbers to look at. You know, I want to make sure that you brought up the pink elephant earlier. Is that right? Or yeah, whatever. Yeah, I mean, as we take a look at, you know, what we're realizing from the state, and whatever that may be, and I know best case scenario is that it opens up to all staff. But, you know, as we take a look at, you know, turning over rocks, looking in corners, et cetera, you know, I'm confident that you and team, you know, have done that to even do what we can, you know, internally as a district within governance, absolutely, to, you know, even increase some of those percentages on top of what we maybe realize from the state.
Madam President, members of the board, we can. We look at a lot of these different scenarios. I talk, remember these are non-judgmental, not me saying. Sure. We have block scheduling. That costs money. We staff our specials at the K-8 at a higher level than the districts around us. That costs money. We pay retiree health care. That costs money. There are large amounts out there, but we prioritize them. And when I talk to some teachers at the high school, block scheduling is essential. To create our well-rounded, to have our graduate rate. So I'm not trying to make it a point about should we or shouldn't we do anything, but there's lots of things we do that cost money. And if you're going to add somewhere, you have to take from somewhere else. It is a zero-sum game. And the governor could open up and say it could go to everybody. He didn't increase the money.
Right.
And so without increasing the money, where is it coming from and how are we doing that?
Sayas Martinez.
Ms.
Can I just jump in a second? First, thank you, Mr. Hicks. The work of the committee is pretty impressive. It's been, what, 6 years that we have been?
5 years.
5? Okay, feels like 6. Going through this process, there is a lot of fidelity in the process. The years that we have no money at all are the years where we have less arguing because there's less to deal with. Unfortunately, in any situation when there's a little more money that's there, all of a sudden it becomes, well, mind me, I've just seen that over the years. Certainly, it makes sense if you choose to do a study session, but the key will be the fidelity of what the team has done is to try to balance all the questions that you're having, and certainly this team I've worked with a lot. There's no question that there's amazing things, but it's amazing that I haven't heard from, for example, our administrators. And you look at their salary percentage, it's lower. We look at our classified that are having a really difficult time in certainly the last couple weeks, especially. The high that they'll get on the chart I'm reading, Mr. Hicks is right, 3.57%. And a percent on a low salary it does nothing. It amounts to, it's lovely, but it really can't buy you much of anything in the real world. So I believe that the committee looked at that, and that's why it's been a 6-month process, not a 6-hour process. Certainly, we can study it more. You can weigh back and forth, and that makes some sense waiting for it. But having said that, but at the end of the day, I would expect you'll hear from just about every group and the value. Everybody has value in this organization, and so to put it to the future, so you are waiting for the next group to come in to impact your heart, as it will.
It does.
Okay, especially in the last couple weeks, is something I would really consider.
Yeah, so for me, sorry, Madam President, I'm not discounting at all the work that's gone into this whatsoever. There's no doubt that we are, I don't want to use the word confined, but restricted, to, what gets handed down, by the state, and, without question. For me, when we take a look at this evening, though, and the budgets and the scenarios, I guess I'm trying to understand overall, to your point, Madam President, is what it is we're being asked to vote on. And we have these different scenarios. We still have information coming down from the state. What are we being asked to approve all the scenarios, and then once we understand more, then we go through an approval process again, or?
Yeah, Madam President, members of the board, the scenarios are presented, meaning that if they fall into one of these scenarios, then that is what goes forward. You'd be approving all of it as is. If it doesn't, as I said, the alternative budget, we would probably have to come back because it wouldn't be as defined as the other situations.
Is it possible that none of these scenarios will fit what the governor ends up proposing?
Right.
Potentially. That's the alternative budget, is if that 9% doesn't happen, we would have to come back because the budget team didn't feel comfortable with where all of it is on that last column. And so I threw in the number just to see, but that's a floating number that could go higher or lower that creates something. So I would definitely say the last one would probably require, even if the board approved everything tonight, require us to come back at that point.
So that would be just my concern is we don't know what we're really agreeing to. And whatever the final number comes in, you make your proposal based on the feedback. Looking at those numbers, the committee could provide feedback one more time. But ultimately, myself, I'm not comfortable because the governor hasn't made his decision yet. That's where I stand. Mrs. Doan?
I think that it's really not going to get any better than it is. I think that a lot of really good people worked really hard to get this budget where it is. We are working on our strategic plan. We want to emphasize safety. We want to bring back counselors in full. We want to bring back behavior specialists. We want to bring back everybody to increase safety in our schools. I think it's going to be a long-term plan. I don't think we're going to be able to fix it in the next 2 weeks. I think we're going to need to approve a budget and get stuff going. Mr. Hicks has said he's going to come back to us if there are changes that are not covered in the proposal he has made. I don't see where we gain a whole lot by just putting everything off and putting everything off until we've talked it into the ground. We are going to have to make these changes over time as we get our strategic plan in order and are able to build a foundation for all these things we want to implement. I don't think we're going to be able to do it in the next 2 weeks or month or whatever like that. I think we need to get a move on with what we can do.
Mrs. Knag.
I'm really excited to be looking at numbers like 11.34 and 8.29 and 5.25 because it's been a long time since we've had those kind of numbers talking about increasing. It's been a long time. And so I pray that the governor's plan does come to fruition. I do hear what the counselors are saying. I think our conversation about wanting to include social workers into our staff is a reflection of our understanding about the complexity of your work and the difficulty you have and the challenges you face dealing with the social emotional situations that you do day in and day out. So please know how much we do understand how valuable you are. I think 8.29. I mean, we don't have the flexibility to change what the governor's proposal is. The governor's proposing the 9.06 for teachers. That's what the governor's proposal is. If it comes down, I'm sure that will be a stipulation. Yeah. So the second group highest is 8.29, and that's what we can afford. And we're also hearing that there's 7 additional days. That makes me feel good too, that there's 7 additional days of pay in there. So I am willing to support this tonight.
I have one more question. The administrators in the past have always discussed changing their calendar year. Right now they work 12 months. Was that discussed in the budget committee to decreasing that time?
Madam President, members of the board, during our budget team, I do not believe, I know I hear it randomly from principals here or there, but we did not discuss it as a full team that I remember. No.
Do you know how many lead guidance counselors fall into the bucket that are not getting what is described tonight?
All of them would not get the additional 7.
How many is that quantitative?
1 at each high school.
7.
So we have a bucket of $200, I believe, if I recall, that we haven't touched, but we would be maxing out our budget.
200,000?
200,000. Yeah. 200,000. And we have 7 high school counselors that we're referring to, and looking at a calendar year for our administrators that may or may not have been discussed. With all those values, could we look at compensating our lead counselors with that, with those ideas?
Madam President, members of the board, am I hearing, so just the 7 get an additional increase, so create another bucket of lead guidance counselors to give them a differentiated amount than the other? Is that what I'm hearing?
That's my train of thought, and the reason I'm thinking that is because when I look at our speech pathologists who are certified, get compensated, our nurses, and so if they're required to have their master's degrees.
They all have masters.
Our teachers do too, though.
So, correct. But some of our teachers don't have master's degrees. I just want to take a look at that and finalizing before when the budget comes down from the governor with final numbers. So with those pieces of information and the final numbers from the governor. So I recognize that you guys want to move forward, and you're more than happy to vote and make that motion, but I will say that I am not comfortable because I don't know what I'm agreeing to. I'm agreeing, the conversation is what ifs. So.
How do you feel, Mr. Sandoval?
So I'll say this. I am comfortable with the budget as long as we have a contingency that informs the board officially after we hear more coming from the state, right, and having those conversations and to see where we may have some flex. I don't know. But however, that said, our counselors, our psychologists, our lead counselors are invaluable, to this district without question. what you bring forth with regard to our students who experience trauma or are in adverse situations, and it allows us to look beyond what's standing right in front of us. Helps us, put them in a situation where that vicious cycle is broken. That said, again, I know we have a proposal coming down from the state that the monies are, restricted. So I think, again, the budget team has done a really good job at looking in every crevice and corner to figure out how we allocate or really, ensure that increases are realized, across the different verticals within the district. So for me, I am good with the budget recommendations under the contingency that we do have some official notification once we understand more from the state.
Madam President, members of the board, if I could share just a little more, just as I'm getting our lobbyist updates and such. First, I would just like to say, being part of our Education and Financial Reform Group has been pretty profitable this year. As I referenced earlier, I meet with the governor's office education advisor on a regular basis. I know her very well now. It allowed us to today, during some of the activities, we were able to get 3 of our teachers, 1 to meet with the governor and 2 to meet with key legislators. And some of the comments that were made there is, especially from one of our representatives, is that you don't understand who you've excluded when you've created these classrooms. And they did make the comment about counselors specifically, and I believe that they looked at a cost that if they could provide another $15 million statewide, that they would include counselors in that conversation. So if that comes to fruition, part of this contingent is if there's funding that comes in with requirements, we follow the intent of law, which means we would get that funding, and that funding would go to the counselors and would increase that amount. At that point, it would be brought up.
That was going to be my comment too, is that the counselors in particular have been a big part of what the Red for Ed people are talking about. So, if the governor changes his plan or updates his plan or negotiates with some of the protesters right now, that could very well be part of it. Yeah. So, given that, if that does come to fruition, we will revisit this budget. I'm willing to move forward with this budget tonight. I'll move to approve the budget as presented.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mrs. Connect to approve the budget as presented. It was seconded by Ms. Stone.
I would like to say just that having a handicapped daughter, I understand the value of counselors to the school, to our teachers, to the parents. I do. And it is on the top of our list. And it is important to the safety of our children. We're not going to forget it, you guys. We're not going to forget you.
Madam President, if I could just echo, think, not just them, everybody. I know I don't show joy at all, hardly at all. Think about being married to me. It's difficult. It's been very hard. There is some good news in this. I feel bad for everybody that doesn't get everything. We should be trying to do everything we possibly can, and we try to do the best job we can, but when I hear these stories, I believe them. And we go around, we have people crying at employee chats. Even after we passed an override that gave everybody a 6.81% increase, the stresses are out there. And that shows you how deep the problem is and how this is not an easy fix that's coming out. And so I appreciate the people that put themselves on the line, that question everything, that have deep, almost yelling arguments in our meetings amongst people, because it means that we are looking thoroughly. I appreciate that we just spent almost 2 hours on an agenda item because it's not rubber stamped, that we're asking questions. We should be doing this, and the awareness, the increase in awareness is a positive thing, and I appreciate everybody that does for the success of this district and for all the students involved.
No, I appreciate everybody's time as well. So with that being said, the motion did pass, 3 yeses, 1 nay, and 1 not present. Moving on to discussion 6.4, report and discussion on local and state and federal legislative issues and activities.
Well, good evening. I think President Sejas Martinez, a lot of what is in 6.4 just was discussed in 6.3. As far as some of our major local, state, and federal legislation that's been going on. I don't know if you have anybody speaking to, I thought you had someone on speaking to that point. I would go with that
First?
first.
Okay, perfect.
Sure.
So we have a guest speaker, Catherine Gatras.
Good evening, Madam President Monica Seja Martinez, Interim Superintendent Ms. Pallas Thompson. I do apologize.
It was fine.
Members of the governing board and members in the community. I'm here tonight as a parent. After looking at the governor's proposal of the 20% increase, I was ecstatic, and I was a parent that was like, yes, we need this for education. After looking through the parameters and reading through the guidelines, I thought of many of my friends who are in education. I'm a parent, I'm not in education, but I've been surrounded by education. I was a former alumni of the Peoria Unified School District, which by the way is amazing. I just wanted to say thank you to all the administrators for notifying parents like myself and keeping us on track of what was going on and just keeping us well informed. As I stand here before you, I just wanted to say one thing, and one thing only. Might be within a few words, but it does take a community to raise a child. With all these teachers and all their efforts to provide, to raise each and every one of these students, I appreciate every single one of them. Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
Was there anyone else on that subject?
That was it.
I don't know that I can add very much to the day and the week that you haven't seen or heard. I would invite, if she chooses to, for Ms. Zangino to share part of what her day was like. Three of our people were invited to speak, one to the governor, and two of them to some of the state representatives. Ms. Zangino was one of them. Both of her, we saw two Janaginos, just the one, Mr. Hicks, was there. Spent 3 hours along with a lot of our teachers today downtown. And I don't know if she had anything to share, but she was right there on the cutting edge as we were watching the day.
Yes, please. And Ms. Ogina, we are honored that you were one of the three that represented us, and the fact that Mr. Hicks, your relationships at the Capitol definitely that was one of the deciding factors that helped Peoria get a seat at the decision-making table. So thank you for your service and your relationship. So, Ms. Ogina, we would love to hear what happened.
Well, there were probably about 25 of us sitting at a table somewhere in the basement of the House of Representatives. One good thing about that was the bathrooms were right next door. Didn't have to use a... Yeah, and we had air conditioning, yes, yes. But we made it perfectly clear that teachers aren't in this alone. We made it perfectly clear that it's a system, and the system doesn't just work with just teachers. We need counselors, we need administrators, we need support staff, we need bus drivers, we need food service workers, we need them all, and they all are underfunded. So we asked multiple times for solutions to solve the system problem, because it's not just teachers that need to be compensated. They went around and tried to explain to us how budgets work like we didn't know. But, we understand how budgets work, but we also understand that they have a system that has expenditures, revenues, and tax carve-outs. And basically, we wanted them to admit that they have to look at all three of those. They can't just look at, revenues and expenditures, especially when they're giving out tax carve-outs in the forms of deductions, credits, breaks, they have to look at that too, and where we can get money from that. Some of the legislators there said they did not sign the Grover Norquist no new tax pledge. And so they said they were on our side, they got it, but we were pretty clear that there's a lack of trust between the legislature, the governor, and us, because we've been burned before. And so I do think that in more ways, we taught them a few things than they tried to teach us about the budget. And that we kept saying the same things over and over again, and we didn't relent. So
I'm going to interrupt you, Jan, before it becomes political. Okay.
I'm sorry.
But no, but you did an amazing job. The team was great today. You were recognized by those people. You asked for a voice.
Yes.
And you got a voice today.
Yes. And they left it open. We could talk about anything. They did. They didn't set the agenda or anything like that.
And she's still standing.
I know.
At the end of a very long day, as is everybody else in the audience today. Or sitting. You're sitting. She's standing.
Air conditioning helped because I understood that everybody else out there was in like 90+ degree heat. And, but, being able to have that voice, I don't know that we moved any needles, but one of the things that they did recognize was the bucket of that designation, that 1,000 designation for just classroom roster teachers, that is something that they have to look at again. And that 15 million, then they said later, in that same breath, that it would cost 15 million more to pay those counselors. And I hope they look for 15 million because they deserve it. Okay,
well, we appreciate it. Thank you. So with that being said, again, let me just reiterate, it is appreciated that they are reaching out to educators, and especially 3 of the Peoria Unified School District educators were represented at the state level. And that says volumes to about who you all are. So thank you very much for your class and your service. With that being said, number 6.5, request for agenda items for future governing board. Mr. Sandoval, did you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah. I think, we've just talked about the social-emotional side of student success and learning, and, I would love to really have a discussion in and around our staffing levels with regard to social workers, psychologists, et cetera, understand where those are at, where we have opportunities and gaps, see where we can be a solution for those students in need.
I'll second that. Any other items?
Oh, no, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Connect. Ms. Stone?
I would like to look at what our mandatory training includes for teachers at the beginning of the year. I don't know if I just need a report at first, or anyway, I'd like to look at that, what we require.
So onboarding for teacher training?
It's called mandatory training.
Mandatory training for teachers?
I don't know if it includes other staff or not.
Okay. I'll second that. As a report, correct?
To begin with.
To begin with, okay, perfect. And we have, I have 2 items. One, just to reiterate, a study session to go over insurance and cost comparisons. So we could do that over the summer so that we can plan for the new year.
I'll second that.
Okay. And then I do have one more. We did receive some information because in lieu of the situation of I'm not having school today and tomorrow, of the administration put together some options and present to the board on how we make up that time. So in the best interest of our students. Do I have to second it?
You wanted that for a future?
Future.
Fine, great.
Future. As long as somebody seconds that. So we currently have the calendar makeup of adding the 2 days to the very end. I would like a discussion on how that came about and what are our options if we could make that time some other way. Or is that the only option? We can't discuss it now. I just need, if somebody wants to second it, then we can.
I don't know if we need to have a meeting, but if we can have.
Yeah. Or if it's easier just to put it in a report, I would be okay with that.
I think that it probably would be easier to talk about how we did come about, what we're recommending, and then some other alternatives we can add to that.
Perfect.
Depending on, everything right now is a little bit indefinite.
Yes.
And so we can look at it as we're getting closer to returning.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is you obviously, you and your staff are going through these scenarios and what then, so just kind of inform us about what.
Keep us up to date.
Exactly. Perfect. All right. With that being said, I like saying that phrase. No more future agenda items. We are on number 7, informational reports. They are all available online. There's no need to go through them as everybody has access to it. 7.2, budget facilities planning construction, that's also there, and report on upcoming meetings and events. Ms. Aries, is there anything you wanted to highlight? Monday, yes. Monday is an exceptional day for Pride of Peoria at 5:30 p.m. at the Arizona Broadway Theater. We have the honor of recognizing our teachers and educators within the district. Okay, the rest of the items are listed for graduations for the high school. They're also available on the website. We are at that time of year where there are a lot of celebrations. Number 7.4, draft for future agenda items. At this time, number 8.1, there are no additional items to address from the public. I don't have any more green slips. And further discussion on any past agenda items. Okay. And so now we are at the very end. Do I have a motion?
I'll second.
All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Motion passes.